The Israel-Hamas war has thrown up a lot of questions across the world, particularly within the United States of America, where the US and people who are handling the situation are questioning and are being questioned. There have been 3 officers of the US government who have resigned so far because of US's position on the war and on Israel's actions and war efforts in Gaza. But there's this first diplomat who has resigned. I'm being joined by Hala Rharrit, who took this bold decision to really resign. And we'll talk to her about what really led her to resigning, firstly, and the situation on the ground, given that she is in Dubai. She's seeing the Arab world and how the Arab world is reacting to the United States of America. Hala, many thanks for joining us here on India Today Global. Let's begin with the fact that you had joined the service in the year 2006. You've been a diplomat. You've seen the Arab world. You were posted in Yemen. There's a lot to what you've done. What made you take this decision to resign from office, being a diplomat for so many years?
Indeed, I was a diplomat for 18 years, really my entire adult life. I joined straight out of my graduate studies at Georgetown, and I studied in the School of Foreign Service. I was interested in becoming a diplomat since a very young age, so I could tell you that it was an extremely painful decision. I had been so proud to represent my country for almost 2 decades. But fundamentally, I was monitoring the situation very closely. I did everything I could from within to try to change course. But when I said that we were violating international law, that my government was violating even US law, it became clear to me that in good conscience, I could not remain in the Foreign Service any longer.
When did you start feeling conflicted about the situation, about the US government's policies when it comes to the war between Israel and Hamas?
So my latest assignment with the State Department was as spokesperson in Arabic for the Arabic language media market. So before this latest conflict, I had done well over 100 representing the US government on a range of issues, and I was very proud to do so. And when crises typically for foreign language spokespeople, we are the arm of the State Department overseas. We always wait to see what will come out of Washington before we go out on the news and amplify whatever we're coming out of Washington. So it was the same for this biggest crisis. On October 7th, along with all of my colleagues, we watched absolutely horrified at the terrorist attacks that were unfolding, and we were waiting to see the response that would come out of Washington. For me, particularly as a spokesperson, the talking points that I would receive to go out and amplify. But from the very beginning, there were significant issues with the talking points that I was receiving. I could not deliver them, and I was very honest with Washington. And I'll tell you why. Because as would be expected, and rightly so, the talking points were very heavy on Israel has a right to defend itself, but they were very much neglecting the plight of the Palestinians. And from very early on, October 8th, October 9th, October 10th, we could see mass civilian casualties in Gaza. But our talking points were not reflecting what was actually happening on the ground. And my particular media market was the Arab world. So I could not, in good conscience, go out and deliver talking points that were so one-sided when people were so impacted by what was going on in Gaza, and also seeing what was happening in Gaza real time. I reported this back to Washington. I asked for more balanced language. Unfortunately, it was a battle that obviously lasted for months and didn't get anywhere as it lasted, as it ended in my resignation, unfortunately. But I can say from the very beginning, there were significant issues that I highlighted for Washington.
In terms of talking points and taking it to the Arab world, the fact that you were there, was that one of the prime reasons why you quit? Or is there a larger aspect? Was there a major trigger in what you were seeing, what you're watching that really led you to resign?
Well, as I said, fundamentally, it was clear to me that we were not abiding by our own laws. As the United States government, we were not abiding, and we continue to not abide by our own laws. And we continue to help Israel violate international law. I did not become a diplomat, and I did not sign up for that. I did not become a diplomat to promote a war or potentially a plausible genocide. I became a diplomat to promote peace, to strengthen ties between the United States and the rest of the world. And that's exactly what I did for 18 years, very dedicated and very proud to do so. But being in the Arab world, of course, also allowed me to see the ramifications of our policy in that particular part of the world. And the ramifications were immense. There was growing anti-Americanism. Every day I was documenting this and I was watching it grow. And I would report this back to Washington because that was fundamentally a threat to our own national security. People that had associated with us for years no longer wanted to associate with the US government. People that were our allies within various organizations or private sector entities throughout the region no longer wanted to do business with us. It was hurting US interests. And as a diplomat, my role was to promote US interests. So I kept on reporting to Washington. This is hurting the United States. This is hurting America. We need to calibrate. We need to be careful how we proceed with this policy. We cannot keep doing what we're doing. And really, the primary concern was continuously providing Israel with offensive weaponry that the whole world could see was killing civilians in Gaza.
Right. Hala, we'll come to your conversations with your bosses, your immediate bosses and headquarters. But before that, what's the personal impact that this war has had on you, your family, your friends? How did that really play a role in the decision that you took?
Well, personally, I can tell you that part of my job was to monitor pan-Arab media and social Arab media. So what that meant was that, and I was doing that to report back to Washington, what the Arab public was watching. And in order for us to be able to be effective messengers, we have to know what our audience is consuming. But in that, on a daily basis, I was seeing what was happening in Gaza, because this conflict has been unlike so many others where everything has been really live streamed on social media. You have journalists, you have what used to be social media influencers turned war journalists that have been documenting in real time their displacement, the killing of their family, of their relatives. And I was consuming that on a daily basis. I was seeing the images of the children getting killed. I was seeing the images of the toddlers that were burnt. I was seeing the images of the remnants of American bombs next to displaced tents. So what happened on Sunday, unfortunately, is not the first time that that happened. It's been happening since the beginning of this conflict. And so, of course, as a human being, I was deeply impacted at a very human level to see so much suffering. I've served in various parts of the world. Some of them have been tough, and I've covered war. I've done a lot in my 18 years, but seeing on a daily basis the carnage that was happening to innocent people, mothers, fathers, daughters, brothers, it was just not just, and it was difficult to consume on a daily basis. And I can say that I also shared these images with Washington, because the U.S. government to see what was happening. And so, of course, that made me, on a human level, react and also speak out against what was happening.
As an officer, what are the key warnings that you really sent across to headquarters when it comes to how this is being perceived in the Arab world, as also how this could really have a long-lasting impact on US's policy towards Middle East, West Asia? I ask you this, Hala, is because we do know that the United States of America has a lot of stake in Israel and particularly in the existence of Israel. And a lot of people have this conversation about proportionality, that in war there can be no proportionality. Would you say that it has far exceeded any kind of argument that one can put when it comes to proportionality in war?
I mean, of course, it's been completely disproportional. And I would have to stress and really emphasize that this militaristic policy has been a complete failure. It has not succeeded in getting the hostages home that so deserve to be back home with their loved ones. That's why you see the families of the hostages protesting in the streets of Israel against the Netanyahu government. So many Israelis also so many Israelis also understand that all this is doing is breeding generational cycles of violence, generational cycles of hate and revenge, and that this is not the way to achieve peace between two peoples that have to live side by side. This is not the way to do it. As a diplomat, I know fundamentally that there are diplomatic solutions to this conflict. We use diplomacy in other parts of the world. For some reason, we've decided to not use diplomacy in this part of the world, which is not helping Israelis. It is not helping Palestinians, obviously, and fundamentally, it is undermining US interests. What I reported back to Washington is that this was generating also a generational, we were losing a generation in the Arab world. And I've said this repeatedly, that quote unquote, even liberal Arabs, even Arabs that previously were not focused on politics, were not focused on foreign policy issues, rather loved American culture and loved what America stood for. Even they began to be, quite honestly, disgusted by our policy, again, because they were consuming on a daily basis on their phones what was happening in Gaza and thought, how could the US allow such carnage? How could the US fuel the killing of children? And for me, I was in the media business. How could the US, a country that stands for freedom of press, remain silent when there's been unprecedented killings of journalists in Gaza? I protested every day within the State Department. Every day I would try to do something. I personally tried to get a statement out on press freedom, and I was met with immense pushback. But that is a fundamental American value. So yes, unfortunately, it is going to severely impact our relations, not just in the Arab world, but throughout the United States. And I hope that President Biden realizes this and begins to change course immediately.
You said that the US is on the wrong side of history. What do you mean by the United States of America being on the wrong side of history? Because many within Washington, D.C., and we see visuals now, Hala, coming in of Capitol, where there are activists who are questioning these senators, congressmen on a daily basis, but they remain unmoved. For people like you to come out and say that they're on the wrong side of history and that the entire administration is not paying heed to the calls of people like you is certainly quite not shocking or surprising, but in many ways not what would have been expected by a country that espouses or is the voice for freedom, for equality, for justice.
I can tell you, Geeta, that it was very, very hard for me to even admit that to myself before I said it out loud, and certainly before I said it publicly. Like I said, I've served my country my entire adult life. I fundamentally have been proud to be a diplomat, but our policy when it comes to what is happening in Gaza is indefensible, and continues to be so. 15,000 children, over 15,000 children now have been killed. There is no way that this is self-defense. There is also no way that this is not a violation of international law. And the response from my government thus far has been to continue sending not just defensive weaponry, but I want to stress offensive weaponry, including 2,000-pound bombs in an area as small as Gaza that is densely populated. There is absolutely no need for Israel to get 2,000-pound bombs during this conflict. None. We are on the wrong side of history because we have not changed course, despite all of the warnings from American diplomats, despite all of the warnings from the medical sector, despite all of the warnings from international organizations, from the ICJ, from the ICC. The administration, for whatever reason, and we can get into that if you'd like, insists on maintaining this failed militaristic policy, even in the face of Israelis themselves protesting against it. The only winner here really is Benjamin Netanyahu and his extreme right-wing government. It's a failure to humanity at this point, and we need to, again, I will repeat, change course in the United States immediately.
Hala, let's just go back to then what really happened when you put in your papers, when you resigned. What was the reaction of your immediate bosses? Did you discuss it with them that you cannot take this policy further and that you will have to step down? Also, you could have moved out. Is it a stand, a position that you're taking on what the US government is doing? Because you could have got yourself transferred back to headquarters, to Washington, and not been a part of this at all.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Geeta. You're right. I could have been reassigned, and that was offered to me, including after I submitted my resignation by some very dear colleagues of mine that were trying to keep me in the State Department. And I appreciated all of their support. I appreciated all of their assistance. I still do appreciate it because they were saying that your voice will matter more on the inside, so please stay. But it was very clear to me that my voice was not being heard to on the inside, and it took me months and months of trying and trying again and trying again until I was silenced, until I was sidelined, until I was told you need to just do your job, until I was threatened with going to HR because I was quote unquote refusing to do my job by doing interviews on Gaza. I refused to amplify the talking points that we were receiving not because I disagreed with them, but because I saw the impact that they were having in the Arab world, which was instigating, which was pouring fire on the flame, on the gas. It was hurting the United States. It was not helping the United States. And so at the end, there are people that within the department who disagree with the policy, and so they've shifted positions, right? They've left the Arab world, or they've shifted their roles, and that is definitely a strategy. But for me, I can say my own red line had been crossed. We've been talking a lot these last few days about red lines. I could no longer serve under this administration. There was just too much that had been done, too much damage that had been done. And I felt that it was important to speak out against it because I began to feel complicit within the government. I really felt like I was enabling and making it okay by my presence remaining in the government. And I felt like I had a responsibility to come out and speak out against it.
There's a very important point you make over here, Hala. You talk about your friends within the administration. Are there many others who actually feel like you have not quit? And how entrenched is the Jewish lobby, the ones who are pro-Israel? Because there are many Jewish organizations who have also spoken out against. So let's not just box them in one, but how entrenched is this entire lobby that furthers Israel's policies and Israel's interests within the administration?
I really want to start by saying that it has nothing to do with faith or religion. We have had two people that have resigned from the U.S. government: Lily Greenberg Call and Harrison Mann. Lily was with the Department of the Interior, and she was a political appointee, and she's Jewish. And same with Harrison Mann, who worked for our Department of Defense, who also, both of them expressed how their Jewish values did not allow them to continue to serve in the administration because this policy is so unjust and is enabling, again, a plausible genocide. But to your question about how do people on the inside feel, I would tell you it's mixed. There is a lot of unease. There is a lot of fear within the State Department. I can speak to what I experienced within the State Department. People are scared to speak out. People are worried about any type of backlash that they would receive if they spoke out. Also, there are people that are very much enabling the policy and are doing so for their own career ambitions. I'm going to be very blunt about that. There are plenty of people that are doing that. But I would say overall, it's an absolutely unprecedented time in the State Department, because never have I experienced in my 18 years such a divisive policy, and a policy where amongst colleagues, amongst diplomats, people were scared to talk to each other. So after my resignation became known internally, before it became known publicly, so many diplomats reached out to me, thanked me for my action, told me they wish they could do the same thing, put in for financial considerations, told me, please speak out when you're out and speak out for the rest of us. So it's not a good time within the department, and it's not the Department of State that I've known for the last 18 years. It's a very fractured, and I expect that there will be more. There will definitely be more resignations to come. I mean, I know that for a fact. I don't know when there will be, and I don't know if they'll be public, but I mean, I've personally spoken to individuals who are thinking of resigning and are trying to figure out how, because they just cannot in good conscience remain in the administration. But in terms of your question about the lobby, yes, on in terms of U.S. politics in general, especially on our U.S. Congress, on our and the Senate, on our politicians, AIPAC, other lobbying groups that serve the interests of Israel, and I would stress this because it often gets overlooked: the arms lobby, the companies that are
Absolutely.
arms are a heavy influence in Washington, and that just needs to be changed because our politicians should not be able to profit from war, and currently they do.
You're making a very important point because we've been covering the US protests in universities, Hala, and these bright students who've come out have been asking for divestment because this is how policy works. You have the very same companies invest, you get money out of it, colleges and universities run with that money, and then the students learn policy or become policymakers from those very same universities. They benefit from those weapons companies, and today they are in decision-making positions where they have compromised, maybe in a way, not knowingly, compromise their own position and standing on what they should believe in terms of humanitarian values. Having said that, let's talk about the doublespeak over here. We see the United States of America vehemently ask Israel to stop the bombing, to allow humanitarian aid. But on the ground, things are absolutely different. What happened very recently on Sunday clearly shows that Israel almost can get away with anything. And there is nothing that the international community has been able to do. There is no one voice at the United Nations that has asked the Israel to stop. They're not paying heed to ICJ. So where does this go?
This is the million-dollar question, right, Gita? And you make a very good point about the disconnect between the words coming out of Washington and what's actually happening on the ground in Gaza. So exactly, I would receive talking points saying, one life lost is one life too many. We oppose the killing of civilians. I wrote back to Washington on multiple occasions saying we are the ones supplying the weaponry to kill these civilians. And not only once, not only twice, but repeatedly, even after the ICJ ruling calling it a plausible genocide. And we continue to do so. I watched really in horror, I have to say, because I still hold out hope that my government is going to change course. But after Sunday's horrific attack on refugees, I mean, they're not refugees; they're in their own land, but they've been forcibly displaced. As they were sleeping in their tents at night and they were burned alive, and children, and the images coming out of Gaza were horrific. And I waited to listen the next 2 days because Washington was closed on Monday. I waited to listen to the press briefings coming out of Washington, and it was the same excuses of we are heartbroken. Yet there's been no policy shift, even though President Biden said specifically if they go into population centers, that is a red line, and the US will reevaluate and cut military assistance. Where is that policy shift? The policy shift should have happened months ago. It is in violation of US law. It is a violation of international law. And the whole world really needs to speak out against it because it's no longer sustainable. It hasn't been sustainable, and we should all be opposing it, including Israelis, who many of them are.
Right. How do you see the future of America's policies in the Middle East? But also, let me add, how do you see the Arab world really react to Israel, react to this entire war? Because we do know that there's a Sunni Shia sectarian fight that takes over everything else. But only in Palestine, they actually come together, whether it's Iran or, for that matter, West Asia. Having said that, do you see the Arab world having spoken the manner in which they should have and stood for Palestinians?
I mean, I think the Arab world, in many ways, you're right. There's the Arab there's the Arab public, and there are Arab governments. And I think in many ways they've been pushing hard, including governments. I mean, there's been even just yesterday, Algeria pushed forward a UN Security Council resolution calling for a stop in Rafah. UAE previously did that as well, and the US has consistently opposed these resolutions. Obviously, I think everybody can do more. Absolutely everybody can do more. Arab governments, certainly the United States, Western governments, India, Japan for that matter, literally everyone could do more when we're seeing over 15,000 children killed. Fundamentally, I think it's geopolitics, right? The US has very strong relations across this part of the world with governments. A lot of these governments also have normalized relations with Israel, and they're trying to see how to potentially leverage those relations in a way that will affect change. I think governments across this region have been clear that Palestinian statehood can no longer be compromised, that the only way to get to a lasting peace is through Palestinian statehood, and they're all pushing for that. And the US has been saying that for many, many years, that we believe in a two-state solution. Yet, practically speaking, we keep doing everything to oppose a two-state solution. We have other countries around the world, including last week, Ireland, Norway, and Spain, recognizing Palestinian statehood. Finally, other countries, Colombia, deciding they're going to open up an embassy in Ramallah. There are so many countries that are taking bold steps. And the US at this point really, really has to wake up, get on the right side of history, and make fundamental change that is going to help everyone in the region, will stabilize the region, and will allow peace between these two peoples that so desperately deserve it.
How do you see US diplomacy be impacted in the Middle East?
Terribly. It will be terribly impacted. And all of my colleagues across the Arab world know it. And it will not be, and it is not only impacted politically, but it is also impacted economically. It is also impacted in the fields of education. It's impacted in the fields of commerce. Like I mentioned, we were seeing so many students no longer wanting to study in the United States across the region because of what was happening in Gaza, and because of the US policy in Gaza. So many businesses that no longer wanted to invest in the United States. It's across the board. People had expectations of us. People continue to have expectations of us. And it pains me dearly to say that we keep on falling short on their expectations. And I continue to hold out hope that we're going to change course every single day, but it's going to take an immense amount of work, if not a generation, to redeem our credibility in the Arab world.
But would you think that there could be a strategic shift with the resignations that the US administration is seeing come from various departments, including you, and maybe a few more after?
I think we're all hoping that it helps, right? I mean, I think that's why some of us have chosen to speak out publicly, because we're hoping that it helps. But it's not just us, it's a chorus. When you have organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, when you have organizations across the board that are not political whatsoever, organizations that focus on genocide prevention, when all these organizations, international organizations, the United Nations, countries across the world are demanding a stop to the violence, you would hope that finally we would wake up and assert this sort of change that's required.
Hala, just a few more questions before I let you go. You spoke about Palestinian statehood and the fact that a lot of countries now are coming, recognizing Palestine as a state individually and pushing for it even internationally. Having said that, the conversations and the voices that we hear from Israel, particularly the hardline faction, is this, that how can you reward Hamas by giving Palestine statehood right now? How justifiable is that statement, even to be put out the way they're putting it out, is almost like, let's punish them with everything because of the attack that Hamas carried out, the terrorist attack that Hamas carried out?
Well, honestly, Geeta, that's the world upside down. That is really the world upside down. And the only way to ensure Israeli safety and security is to ensure Palestinian self-determination and safety and security. That is the only way. And we heard from the Spanish government, who very rightly said recognition of Palestinian statehood is a stance in opposition to Hamas. It's very, very clear. That is the only way to be able to go against extremism on all sides. And I have to say that I also documented the rise of popularity, Hamas's rise of popularity across the Arab world. Because what people are seeing, and not just the Arab world, across the world for that matter, because what they're seeing is making people really go lose their minds and go radical. And instead of having the effect, and I worked myself for years on countering violent extremism. I myself survived 3 terrorist attacks in Yemen. I could speak to you for hours about it. The fact that all of this human suffering is happening in Gaza is radicalizing people. It is not doing the opposite. It is absolutely making Israel unsafe. And we just think about the over 20,000 orphans that have been that have lost their parents, whose parents were killed in Gaza. How do we expect these orphans to grow up? Traumatized, absolutely traumatized. Do we expect them to not pick up a gun and try to avenge the killing of their parents? This vicious cycle of violence must absolutely end. And Geeta, if I may just take the opportunity to highlight a conversation that I had earlier this week. I spoke to 2 incredible men, one Israeli and one Palestinian, who have come together. The Israeli man, Maoz, lost his parents. His parents were killed on October 7th. They were killed by Hamas. And the Palestinian man, Aziz Abu Sara, his brother, and other relatives were killed by the Israeli army. Both of them have come together and have said, enough revenge, enough violence, enough going against each other, enough hate. They, as bereaved family members, have come together in a spirit of collaboration, in a spirit of understanding that their safety and security is intertwined. And they said something very, very beautiful to me. They said that they already live in the future. They live in a future where Palestinians and Israelis live side by side in harmony and in support to each other, that they just need to bring the rest of the world with them. And they were asking for the United States to stop continuously fueling this violence by shipping arms to the state of Israel. And this is coming from people who have lost their loved ones. So if they can get there, the rest of the world should be able to get there.
That's an incredible story, Hala. I hope our audience, viewers, policymakers are watching this, listening to what we really have to say over here. But there's also the fourth, the most important pillar when it comes to dissemination of news, and which is our part of the world, which is the media. How have you seen the coverage of this in the United States of America? I ask you this, Hala, is because personally, being an Indian and seeing how America reacts to situations here in India is very different from what we are seeing. The same newspapers, same media houses really cover the situation between Israel and Hamas. I'm giving you an instance. We had protests over here in India, and we really, Washington did come down heavily on on New Delhi. We've seen Washington come down heavily, rightly so, in many parts of the world where there have been violations. But the very same media highlighted how there was clamped down in India, so on and so forth. But now when we see them and when we read them, quite muted, I should say, in terms of how they are highlighting the Israel-Hamas war.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a very good point, Geeta, and honestly one that I also highlighted back to Washington in terms of how different media coverages in this particular conflict, and I'll explain why. There's obviously mainstream media, and in the United States, mainstream media is known to not really many times go heavily in terms of focusing on the plight of Palestinians. But there has been social media in ways that has documented things that nobody expected to see on their phones on a daily basis. And I think that's why we've been seeing so many protests among the youth, because these young people, including many in the Arab world, but also I'm talking specifically about the United States, these young people have been not getting their news from mainstream American outlets. They've been getting their news directly from Gaza. they've been seeing on a daily basis exactly what's been happening to people on the ground in Gaza, and it's been absolutely horrific. And that's what has made people mobilize in ways that has been unprecedented, really. It doesn't matter their faith, it doesn't matter their background, their ethnicity, even their socioeconomic status. But so many people have been watching on their phones the absolute devastation and the carnage on a daily basis. And that's caused quite a disconnect with those who have been consuming media from mainstream media, who hear about something, right? But they hear it with a sort of a twist, right? In terms of this latest massacre that happened on Sunday. Mainstream media covered it, of course, but they also very much amplified Israel's talking points when they covered it, saying that it was a mistake or an accident. How can you have so many accidents? How can you have the latest technologies, the best, military equipment in the world, and not realizing that you're dropping bombs, and may I add, American bombs, on such a area? It is insane. And if any other country had dared to make such a ridiculous assertion, media would have called them out on it. But mainstream media is not quite there yet in the United States. Some are, and I have to commend a lot of outlets that have done some deep investigative journalism and have really, really covered things and shown the humanity of Palestinians. But unfortunately, there is a lot of amplifying Israeli government talking points across media, which is not the case on social media. And so there's this disconnect, and I would say a generational disconnect in terms of what's happening in Gaza, especially in the United States.
Speaking of policies, elections around the corner in the United States of America, there could be a Democratic government, or the Republicans could return. Should Trump return, we've already heard what his stand and statements and position is on Israel. How difficult would things get then for Palestine?
Geeta, honestly, I think you may be surprised to hear my answer, but I think it would be the same. And I'll tell you why. This administration has a different tone in terms of its rhetoric, right? Its rhetoric is different in terms of we're heartbroken. We are concerned about the loss of life, but no action has been taken. None. It's lip service. It's almost condescending at this point. It's almost patronizing and insulting.
So you're actually saying, Hala, that they'll not be hypocritical. That's the only difference.
I'm sorry, say that again?
That they'll not be hypocritical, that there'll be no double speak. They'll just be plain doing exactly what this government is doing and just be blasé about it.
I mean, in simplistic terms, yes. I mean, this administration has provided Israel with any weaponry that it wants, even after the ICJ ruling and now the ICC ruling. There is obviously, I'm not favoring a Trump administration, and I think it would be catastrophic, not just for our foreign relations and for our domestic policies within the United States. But I want to point out this fallacy. I want to point out this, it will be worse under Trump. When you actually look at the policy itself, you have 15,000 children that have been killed. You have people that continue to be starved every single day in Gaza. You have our own USAID administrator admitting that there is famine, human-made famine. Yet this administration has only pretended to help with airdrops that are really just a PR tool to try to pretend like you're helping. So fundamentally, do I think that the situation will be better or worse under a different administration? I think they're both interested in profiting from war, to be quite blunt about it. And I think that the status quo will remain under either, in particular for this issue, unless something is done about it, and that something will be from the people. Not just the American people, but the people all across the world that stand up and say enough is enough.
Somebody in Israel said that this could be a prolonged war. How do you see, what's your reading? Will this go on for a very long time? And should that happen, what's the future of Gaza, or whatever is left of Gaza, and for Palestine? Should there be a time and point where the question of Palestine and Palestinian statehood is resolved, what's the governance going to look like in Gaza then?
Look, I can tell you, Geeta, that I read the South Africa submission to the ICJ very, very carefully when it was submitted to determine whether it was genocide, because I was still in the Foreign Service at that time, and I also needed to make my own determinations professionally for myself, but also as a human being in terms of what was happening in Gaza. And when you read the statements that Israeli officials, from the Prime Minister to the Minister of Defense, have said publicly and continue to do so publicly about their aim in Gaza, it is very, very hard not to understand that their aim is ethnic cleansing. And that's not from anything else but their own words. And so when you have officials saying it's still going to take more months, look how many people have been killed in the course of these 7 months. Does that mean literally you will kill everybody else in Gaza? They will either die from a bomb, they will either die from malnutrition or from disease. If you have destroyed every single hospital, there's no more fully functional hospitals. You have made the entire Gaza Strip uninhabitable. When you think about basic things like sanitation, toilets, people can barely live. So I think the aim really of this right-wing Netanyahu government is ethnic cleansing unless they are stopped. And I think this administration, word, has tried to stop them in word, but not in action. And point that it is really a collective responsibility that as we all around the world what's happening, we all stand up and say enough is enough and call for an end to this carnage.
Finally, before I let you go, Hala, as a mother of 3, what do you take home to your children as a message, not just from this experience, but from the position that you have taken, the stance that you've held, as also personally, what are your future plans? Where do you go from here? The fact that you've quit a service, the one and only that you've known all your life, all your adult life. What do you do from here?
Yeah, Geeta, well, I can tell you that as a mother, I was absolutely personally impacted just as a human being, as a mother, of seeing the devastation in Gaza. And what I teach my kids is humanity. That's what I try to teach my kids, that they should love everyone, that they should support everyone, regardless of their background, regardless of their faith, regardless of anything. And at the very fundamental, basic, when I have my 2 children fight, what do I teach them? Don't fight back. Don't hit back. When someone sometimes is in pain, what they need is a hug. Obviously, that's a very simplistic way of looking at this. But going back to the incredible 2 men that I spoke to earlier this week, Mazuz and Aziz, people need to come together. Humanity needs to come together in this horrific time and say, enough violence, enough revenge, enough hate, and let's live side by side and make the world a better place for our children, our children's children. And what I plan, to answer the last part of your question, Geeta, what I plan on doing is to keep doing what I've been doing for the last 18 years. As silly as it may sound, I became a diplomat to try to make the world a better place. I became a diplomat to try to help my country, and I'm going to keep doing that. It's unfortunate that I can no longer do it from within the government, but I'm going to keep doing it from outside the government. I travel to Washington in a couple of weeks to speak there and to do some work there on behalf of various organizations that are advocating for peace. And I will continue to highlight causes of injustice, not just in Gaza, but in other parts of the world. I mean, there's so much conflict happening. You see what's happening in Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and so many places. And so I hope to continue to be a voice for peace and to be a voice of reason to try to bring people together in such difficult time.
Hala Rharrit, many thanks for joining us and wishing you the best for this new journey that you've begun, and only hoping that you bring about the peace that you wish upon not just the people but the world as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Geeta, for having me.